Afternoon. This is Joe Lurch, VACO staff, Director of Local Government Policy, and welcome to our VACO pre-conference breakout session on the future of housing. Excited to have both Erik Johnston, Director of DHCD, and Susan Dewey, the CEO of Virginia Housing. And I think it's the right time also to point out that our sponsor for today's pre-conference breakout is Virginia Housing. Now, with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris Thompson with Virginia Housing to go ahead and get us started. So take it away, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Joe, and really thanks to everyone at VACO for allowing us this opportunity today. I know in ramping up for this that Susan and Erik both are very excited about the opportunity we've got. So first of all, just again, welcome. This is the Future of Housing discussion. My name is Chris Thompson. I'm going to be moderating today. And the ability to rent or own is a growing problem across the Commonwealth, and it's been further highlighted by the coronavirus pandemic. So in this session, we're going to explore themes revolving around housing and economic development linkages, provide updates on recent housing studies, highlight some examples of partnerships with local governments, including some specific items around public housing, revitalization, homeownership efforts, and the changing housing and work environment that we're seeing now that's also presenting more remote and home opportunities. Our speakers today are experts in this field, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to share with us over the next hour or so. We are fortunate to be joined by Susan F. Dewey, CEO of Virginia Housing, and Erik Johnston, Director of the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. So first, just a little bit of background for each of our panelists today. Susan Dewey is the CEO of Virginia Housing, formerly known as Virginia Housing Development Authority, or VHDA. The Board of Commissioners of Virginia Housing appointed her to this position effective in June of 1999. Prior to this, Susan served for 3 years as a Virginia Housing Commissioner. She knows this environment very well. Susan is a CPA and received her BA and MBA from the College of William & Mary. Erik Johnston is the Director of the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. Erik is responsible for the management and policy oversight of DHCD, which provides community development housing program support to communities across the Commonwealth. Erik served as Chief Deputy at DHCD from 2006 to 2017. And prior to joining DHCD, Erik was Deputy Policy Director under Governor McAuliffe. And he also served as Director of Government Affairs for VACO. So Erik, I guess this is sort of a homecoming for you. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So Susan and Erik, welcome and thank you for joining us. And let's jump into it.
Great.
First question is just to kind of set the table today. So we hear a lot about affordable housing and workforce housing and how it's such an incredibly important issue for Virginia and really across the country. So can each of you spend a few minutes discussing what are the Commonwealth's greatest needs when it comes to affordable and workforce housing? And maybe Susan, I could ask you to get us started.
Thank you very much, Chris. And first of all, let me say it's a pleasure to be with all of you, our critical partners in our affordable housing mission. And thank you for inviting us and listening to us today. You know, affordable housing is vital. To me, it's the center of everything else. And we'll talk about that more as we go forward. But there are some great needs that we're seeing all across our Commonwealth, and they're different depending on what region you're in. As you know, we're a very diverse state. So I think in general, the availability of housing options across all price levels. For example, in 2018, we know that almost 30% of Virginia households were cost burdened. And we're pretty sure that that number has gone up now in this COVID environment. And you see critical needs again, like in the high growth areas of Northern Virginia, your rural areas with limited access to resources and services, and our urban communities with high concentrations of poverty. We also see and are concerned about limited first-time home buyer inventory and increasing competition for the homes that are available. Continued growth in construction cost, as well as just shortages, particularly in our rural area, to even get contractors to do the work. And that's exacerbated by the cost and supply issue. We also have in many of our communities aging or substandard housing communities, and the availability of subsidy eligible rental housing is also an issue that we're seeing. We do know that our partners, and you all are our partners, and the people that work in your localities for you are doing a great job at layering resources together, connecting federal, state, local, philanthropic funding all together. We see a lot of layering in many of the developments we're working on. But what we really need are more resources in general. And we're finding that the need is great for affordable housing, and we are trying to do the best we can with the resources, but we need more. So let me just stop there and Erik, see what you'd like to add.
Thanks, Susan, and thank you, Chris, for that introduction. I want to especially thank VACO and Dean, Joe, Carrie. It was a real honor of my career to work at VACO, and I actually got to staff this committee and learn so much from local elected and appointed officials. So thank you for your work to really work together on the priorities of local governments and bring those to the federal and state level. I'll say a couple things. The Department of Housing and Community Development has a broad mission in partnering for better communities, and Susan and the team at Virginia Housing is really our critical partner on the housing front, and housing is really central to all components of our mission. But I'll talk more later about some of the areas we've partnered with counties on broadband and other areas. I think what Susan said is key, is that housing is really central. It's the home and its linkages to economic development, for health, and education. As you all know, as local elected and appointed officials, that is central to everything that is to all the other policy issues, that it's intricately linked. And land use and housing is one of the main policy issues where still, as you know, the flexibility for local to focus on their priorities and the feature of is decide most of the level, and we at the state and federal are partners in that effort. And our agency has some various tools and resources to partner on incentivizing. But I think key is learning from each other and learning from the best practices that are going on in counties and towns across the Commonwealth, and then also across the nation, to learn about those things that are producing results, and in forms of increasing affordable housing and getting at some of those broader policy that the local leaders are moving on. I'll just admit, one of the things we're really in the Commonwealth is that because of executive and legislative work at the state level and legislature, we've had a strong partnership between housing and health for a long time. Pandemic here, we've also focused on critical pandemic here as we also some policy areas. Executive Order 25 is what Governor Northam signed that at the beginning of his administration, that lays out the key affordable housing priorities that we as an agency are focusing on, and that is to increase the supply of permanent supportive housing. It's three main priorities. The permanent supportive housing would be for the most vulnerable populations, whether they be veterans, seniors, the seriously mentally ill, populations with the chronic homeless, those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that focus through service board, we're working with your continuum of care. We're working with your planners and developers on together as agencies on that critical population, and it's so intricately linked beyond building new housing, but also in terms of the supportive services and other the human resources state level. We're also really focused on reduced evictions and really has a higher rate of evictions. And the Governor Northam has focused in the General Assembly on additional best practices and resources to help us work together to reduce the rate of evictions in the Commonwealth and become a national leader in ensuring housing stability. And then the biggest, Susan really said this really well, talking about the various needs in terms of across and increasing the both rental and home ownership opportunities there is a critical shortage of. So those would be the three buckets that I'll mention as well. Based on Board 25, which really comes out of a lot of what we've been seeing in localities and regional planning district commissions. That you all have been working on these issues for a while, and so those are the focus of the state.
Susan, Erik. Yeah, thank you for that. And Erik, you kind of touched on this, but I'd like maybe to go a little bit deeper. So for DHCD and Virginia Housing, I mean, you are the Commonwealth's primary housing agencies. I'm not always sure everyone really knows the extent of what each of your organizations do. I mean, Erik, for example, you get into so many other areas around community development, whether it's broadband or working with building codes. And then Susan, I know a lot of people associate Virginia Housing with mortgages. I mean, I don't know how many people I bump into that said, oh yeah, my daughter just got their first mortgage with you. And that's wonderful, but there's a whole lot more below the tip of the iceberg. So maybe Erik, you could just kind of expand on some of your comments and talk a little bit more about what your mission is and some of the key programs and services that you offer, as well as, you've got any examples you want to share.
Our really focus at Quad. We are focused on being partners for better communities, and we really understand that just like Virginia Housing, at the end of the day, the solutions and the actual implementation, all of our funding streams have local level by local leaders and community groups, and so our agency, I'll mention a few, and we've worked with VACO and your membership on several of our key priority issues. Really what we're focused on is outcomes. So we try not to do a laundry list of programs, and try to work with our partners on understanding the priority outcomes that they're looking for, and then trying to build back of what funding sources we have or our partner agencies have. And that's one of the things about community development is it's puzzle making. It's a lot of putting together the priorities, community engagement, and then what resources can help and incentivize. A couple of the big initiatives I'll mention is that we're the lead agency on the Commonwealth's efforts to provide access to broadband across the state. Governor Northam has really leaned in on this, as well as the General Assembly. And so we from having about $2 million in resources to almost $50 million proposed in this budget in the special session. And so your membership has been actively engaged in partner on bringing those solutions to provide ubiquitous broadband coverage across the Commonwealth. Also, the staff for the Go Virginia initiative, and that initiative is really focused on providing incentives to create new workforce development programs, new entrepreneurial efforts, new site development initiatives for economic development, and then also new business support, cluster scale up, helping the higher paying jobs in your region to create more higher paying jobs, but also create the systems that are going to lead to a diversified economy. And so that initiative, the Go Virginia, has a new economic recovery and resilience really been firing on all cylinders with the input and participation of local governments in the retooling of the economy during the pandemic, especially. Our community development team, we have various federal and state resources, significantly through community development block grants, and also had some new changes to that program, for locally initiated pandemic responses and small business assistance, water, wastewater infrastructure, opportunity zone planning, a host of resources from state and federal government to help, along with Main Street and revitalization of downtown commercial districts. We're about to finalize adoption of the building and fire codes process. I know your localities and your staff are very engaged in that process, and our codes are so critical to the future of housing in terms of building technologies and other the cost of housing and reduce the cost of development, energy efficiency, increase resilience. We work with the Commission on Local Government staff at our agency as well, and then I'll just and they are a partner on unfunded mandates, on boundary line adjustments, etc. So happy to talk more about that. But the housing piece that we're here focused on, all those programs connect to our housing work. But the main focus of our agency and state and federal funding streams are supporting the homelessness system, the continuums of care across the state, working to end homelessness. We work in having staff focused on preventing. And then we also, the biggest effort, new housing, is the Housing Trust Fund. That program is slated to go up to $55 million in this fiscal year, a big increase from the $7 million we were at last, with Governor Northam and the General Assembly's support on that. So that initiative helps with both affordable housing construction. It also helps with homeless reduction grants and grants to help support housing stability. So we do have a broad mission, a lot of programs, but I think the key to interacting with our agency that we do with your staff is to work closely with and then try to plug you into the different resources available. Chris.
Hey, Chris, this is Joe Lynch. I'm just going to cut in real quick. So everybody knows there's nothing wrong with your screen. Erik has a bit of a technical difficulty issue. So he's freezing just a little bit, but Erik, we're getting most of what you're saying. So I just wanted to let everybody know that. And of course, you touched on broadband, and of course, it is a big issue all across the Commonwealth. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And I think we're all adjusting to working in kind of a virtual platform now. So we've all been dealing with issues of connectivity to, kids in the background and animals howling. So it's par for the course, and it's part of the job. But thank you. So Susan, things you would like to say about Virginia Housing and mission and key programs?
Yes, thank you, Chris. And, as Erik said, we partner very closely with DHCD on just about everything. I talk to Erik sometimes, I think, more than my husband. But we were structured very differently. And some of you may know this. We were created in 1972, and we were created a little bit differently as a self-supporting independent authority. Actually, in our code, it's called a political subdivision. And what that means is basically we get no state funding whatsoever. So we raise our money in the capital markets, the issuance of bonds and securitization of our loans. And that way we're able to bring a lot, as you'll hear later in this presentation, to the state without any cost to taxpayers. So we were originally primarily known for our first-time home buyer programs, and still are. And in addition, we've partnered with a lot of nonprofits, for-profits, and your communities to do rental housing for many, many years, almost 50 years. But then about 15 years ago, we created our community outreach division, and Mike Hawkins, many of you probably know him, as well as Chris Thompson, are leading the way in that effort to really bridge between homeownership and rental and work more closely with your communities, with your localities, to find out what's needed and how we might be able to address this needs from the very beginning of that process. And one way we do that is through our eyes and ears. We keep our ear to the ground. We'd like to come out and walk with you and talk with you and find out what's going on and what you need and where your issues are. We have a number of advisory groups, one for homeownership, one for rental, one for permanent supportive housing. Rural is another one of ours. And we just created a Minority Business Advisory Council because we want to do a better job at outreaching to historically underserved populations and foster more inclusive communities. And so we've just created that group. And our eye is always on data, looking at industry trends, what's going on, policy impacts and other developments. And we integrate these two, what we see and hear, so we can have a comprehensive picture. But ultimately, it gets down to us really working with you what you need. Right now, we have about 800 organizations that we include as part of our housing services delivery network. And these partners are critically important to what we're trying to do. One of the ways in which we've developed a program that serves a variety of needs, most difficult to serve populations, vulnerable communities, is through what we call Resources Enabling Affordable Community Housing, or you probably have heard about our Reach Virginia program. And this is the way we put a large portion of our excess revenues into a fund which actually goes to support our home ownership, our rural, and our community outreach programs. Some of it is done through subsidized lending and our rental programs. That's an example. Some of it's done directly through grants, planning grants to your organizations. And then also our down payment assistance grant. And that is a tremendous tool for first-time home buyers, because not having a down payment is the #1 barrier to home ownership, particularly in our historically underserved communities. So we have the down payment assistance grant that we couple with free home ownership education, as well as something called a mortgage credit certificate, which enables there to be a direct deduction on federal income taxes over the life of the loan. We also have programs specific to populations such as first responders, teachers, nurses, called our Community Heroes program. And we service all of our own loans, which means we work closely with our homeowners throughout to make sure we sustain home ownership. And then in the rental side, we do have a lot of planning grants, subsidized loans, as I mentioned. In fact, last year, fiscal year 20, even with COVID, we provided $811 million in financing. That was a record for us. And it helped us to develop about 5,500 quality rental units, with most of those dedicated to lower income families and communities. We also, though, have a mixed income, mixed use program that we've done in a lot of your communities. And that is critically important to work with our non-traditional developers that might be doing market rate housing, but giving them incentives to put some workforce housing, lower income housing into those developments, so that we can really make sure we have a mix of income, which we believe better serves inclusive communities. We also have our low income housing tax credit program we administer, which is a federal program, but really helps to drive down the cost of rental housing. And we administer the Housing Choice Voucher program for a lot of your localities that don't have a public housing authority. So that really does serve our lowest income population. So these are just a few examples of the programs that we have that meet a diversity of needs all across our state.
You're muted, Chris.
We work together.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm here, Chris.
Better? Okay.
Much better. I thought it was me.
Still getting the hang of this. I was just sharing what's been a really neat experience is just how well the two organizations work together. I mean, I can say firsthand, we are in communities, we are at meetings together all the time. We call each other to talk about how we can provide a higher level of support. So it's great to see that interaction and kind of layering of technical assistance and financial resources together. And I think, you two could probably go on and speak volumes about, the different initiatives and programs that are out there. And I don't know that everyone really has an appreciation for the breadth of what each of you have available. But to that point, I did want to ask you if you could talk a little bit more, about maybe some things that differentiate your organizations, as well as maybe some of the opportunities you've seen where you've come together more recently and around specific needs. For instance, I know there have been some studies recently where you've worked together around the overall economic impact. Susan, I know there's been some more recent work specific to Virginia housing. So just wonder if maybe you could offer the audience a little bit of insight into some of those things.
Okay. One of the things that some of you remember that we worked on, I think Erik maybe talked a little bit more about that, but is we wanted to show that important link between housing and economic development. And so under Governor McAuliffe, both agencies were involved in a study of the linkages between housing and economic development and how housing is really the sixth largest industry in the Commonwealth. We took that a step further at Virginia Housing this past year, and we did an economic impact study. And what we really wanted to do is to show, again, how are we doing in promoting economic development and health across the Commonwealth. So we did this with a consortium of our very own state universities. And what the data found, they looked at 2014 through 2018, a 5-year period. And key highlights included over 70,000 new households were assisted in obtaining affordable housing with our efforts. Our programs also produced $10 billion in state economic activity, supporting 66,000 jobs, which paid $2.5 billion in wage and salaries to Virginia's workforce. So our work with our critical partners and stakeholders is really vital to the economic, right now, recovery of our state and going forward well-being of our state. We wanted to also show this in a recent insert, and we can leave you all with a link to that. That was in Virginia Business Magazine. And this was in the September issue. It was a 12-page insert. And it really showed what we were doing with our partners all across the state to strengthen Virginia's economy and create more opportunities for all. It focused a lot on workforce housing and the people that really needed homes, and to make sure that we were doing linking housing to our efforts to recruit the workforce that we need in the future and make sure we're retaining that same workforce. The insert also highlights the role of regional and local partnerships to really address the most critical needs that we see and you see in your communities. And it showed how we were using the resource I mentioned earlier, REACH, to address many of those needs. So let me turn it over now and pause and turn it over a little bit to you, Erik.
Thanks, Susan. I think you had some really good points, and I'll just add that I really think it's on state government, and I agree with Susan and I. That if someone approaches one of our staff, that the goal is that they could understand Virginia Housing and our programs and our sister agencies programs, because I know for you as local officials, you have a myriad of federal state agencies to partner with. And so one of the exciting things about our two organizations is that we're really kind of looking holistically in the manner that local government leaders do to solving the outcome, and housing is usually a critical component of anything related to some of the priorities that you're working on. Susan touched on the Housing Policy Advisory Council report, and VACO and VML were involved with that. And look that too. The data on housing if you can look at that yet. It's a great resource that looks at some of the challenges that we face as a Commonwealth to developing enough affordable housing, but also some really data and tries to provide kind of information that can be used at your planning district commission level or locality level. I know Housing Virginia Forward, other groups, Virginia Housing, others have worked with PDCs on taking that data to the next step and level of making sure it's useful at the local level. There's no doubt that keeping the just as an industry, being the sixth largest industry, your membership and your local building officials, I mean, during the kind of dark days at the beginning of this pandemic, when we were worried about construction coming to a halt, many of your local building code officials found ways to continue to do inspections virtually, made sure that job sites were continuing. So I do want to commend you and your local building departments and fire code officials as well for keeping this, valuable part of our economy going that is also so critical to the short and long-term work we're doing to make sure we have enough affordable housing for Virginians. We put up a website in partnership with the Virginia Building Code Officials Association that gave weekly updates on the status of local building departments, and several of your members had some great webinars facilitated to help with that. And I'll just say that that was the study ending at the last administration, and currently Virginia Housing and DHCD are partnering on several studies that Chris mentioned. Susan may talk more about the tax credit study to see if there's appetite for additional tax credit at the state level to incentivize affordable housing. House Bill 854 by Delegate Murphy is also a broad study that really gets at us looking at multiple facets of the affordable housing inventory. It looks at what are the best tools to increase the supply of affordable housing. And we did, as agencies, ask for a one extension on that, given the pandemic, to really broaden this, to also focus on pandemic impacts on housing, and also focus on racial equity, and inclusion issues that are so paramount in how we address affordable housing challenges as well. So we're excited because there is just never been more interest from the General Assembly and federal government, and the governor has been leaning in on this from day one in terms of just the working together to make sure we have all the information and tools available for local, state, and federal partners to make the best decisions in the space. But also, there's just a lot of energy around the outcome and what everyone wants of making sure we have more affordable housing for Virginia, for all the reasons we've talked about at the top of the meeting. One thing I might highlight as well, there'll be opportunity in the year ahead on that study to dive deeper in and hopefully provide some information that's helpful to you and your staffs. But in addition, I wanted to just focus on one thing that differentiates some of our work at DHCD is that some of our programs, and some Susan's as well, I know, but allow some of the housing to focus on also commercial and look at downtown revitalization. So Virginia Housing and DHCD different resources in that space to help with downtown revitalization. And we really encourage you to purchase both, because focus on local, state, and federal level on getting that universal access and broadband, and with the how our workforce can work in any part of the Commonwealth. We have employees all scattered across the Commonwealth, and we've been opening more to that placemaking, the work that localities do on placemaking. Workforce is one of the key elements that employers are looking for, that quality of your workforce. And placemaking is critical to attracting that workforce, with the credentials and skills, and then developing it as a place that people want to live. And that if with all the information we've been seeing on that and trends, that kind of placemaking and quality of life can be very similar, whether it be in St. Paul or South Boston, in Crozet, and Arlington, in any part of the Commonwealth. And downtown revitalization and work to create that placemaking in downtowns, no matter what size, whether they be towns or unincorporated areas. We do have a lot of work on our Main Street efforts, our commercial district corridors, that pairs really nicely, and we believe in to to partner with the housing resources. So both the housing, increasing the supply of housing in our downtowns, but also increasing work opportunities in downtowns, both small business, but also even small scale manufacturing. Virginia Housing partnered with us, and Virginia House with a small scale manufacturing pilot in downtowns. There's so much opportunity in that space, and I think that's an area to see continued growth in terms of of housing, and no doubt all this research shows that the cost of housing is a huge potential draw to the workforce to create the economic opportunity in your communities, the economic opportunity that we're all seeking. So I wanted to add those couple points and say that there's just so much work ahead in that space of research and collection, and we know we need VACO and VML and all locality efforts and partnerships in that space. Chris, I'll kick it back to you.
Great. And, I'm going to just feed off of that commentary around the partnerships and kind of move into a different part of the discussion. So as you both have highlighted in your comments, Virginia is an incredibly diverse state. We've got everything from urban centers, rural communities, coastal communities, and everything in between. And, back in the days when we were out doing more of the face-to-face visits, I know from just personal experience, you could start up in Accomack County and go all the way to Lee County and still be in your car 9 hours later and not have left the state. I mean, it's just an incredible amount of diversity from the economics, the workforce, the housing conditions. And I just wanted to ask if you could both talk a little bit about the role of partnerships. We can't do this all on our own. So are there some things you would like to offer around regional partnerships, and talk about how maybe some examples of cooperation have led to some positive outcomes? Susan, I can kick it back to you.
Sure. Well, I wanted to start off with just letting everyone know that we are in the completion stages of our new strategic plan, which is called Opportunity 2024, and it's building on the successes that we've had over the past few years. And I wanted to mention that there are 3 critical areas that we're looking at in that strategic plan. One of them is to really continue to promote first-time home ownership, particularly with our historically underserved minority communities. So we're really looking at new ways to do a better job with our partners in that. The second is really trying to stretch further with our rental communities, particularly those most vulnerable populations, such as our public housing needs for revitalization. And the third is to foster inclusive communities and really look at your communities and drill down a little further in how we can better serve the needs of the various communities within your locality. And that's going to take, as you said just now, Chris, that's going to take a lot of partnerships. And we are really looking at how we can collaborate all across the state with our stakeholders. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that some of the work, for example, that we have done in Northern Virginia. I know most of you are aware of Amazon's announcement of its HQ2. And we were, for the first time ever, and I've been there 21 years, we were called to the table to see, because they brought up the issue of the importance of housing in that area. So we were able to come to the table and contribute an additional $75 million in resources spread over a period of 5 years to really help support affordable housing in that area where already, the cost of housing is high. So we did that in conjunction, again, with our partners in trying to find out what was most needed in the Northern Virginia area. But that's not the only place that we're bringing together regional partnerships and efforts in communities. A lot of what we are doing, in fact, I wanted to bring up a story about Middlesex County, and Erik and I were both there along with Governor Northam. I guess it's about a year ago, and one of the comments they made and an effort that we're all involved in is their own version of Amazon. And there is significant effort going on there to produce workforce housing. They're taking an old minority school and they're moving it across the road and creating a brewery. They are working with us on some much needed housing for teachers to keep those in the localities, and also on some issues that are connected to public water and sewer. So it's a major involvement, and we've been providing community impact grants along with some of our other traditional funding. I know DHCD's been doing a lot there also with their Vibrant Communities initiative. Another place is Price's Fork School, another partnership with DHCD. We've been working on an adaptive reuse of a former school building, as well as some new construction to provide housing for seniors, which will include a farm-to-table restaurant, a brewery, and a lot more to create, again, as Erik mentioned earlier, that sense of place, and to make sure that we're able to serve all of our populations in those efforts. And we've also been working very closely with the Planning District Commission in your area, from New River Valley, Shenandoah Valley, Central Virginia. We're partnering with those planning districts because, again, that's that regional collaboration that we're all interested in, to conduct housing analysis, to examine where there are gaps, and to look at where there might be obstacles and barriers to housing development. What type of housing is needed? Again, I think mixed income housing is something that a lot of the local communities are very interested in, and seeing how we can better partner in your communities. One thing that really comes to my mind in this space also is mobile home parks. Now, we don't talk about those all the time, but particularly in your rural communities, we know mobile homes are a very important source of housing. One example of our efforts is in the Charlottesville area, Southwood Mobile Home Park, and we're working with the habitat in that area. It's a tremendous undertaking. Again, with DHCD, this community contains 341 units that are in very bad shape. It's over 100 acres, but we're really working to support their efforts. They're engaging their residents on how we can promote new housing, new types of housing, maybe some rental housing and mixed income housing in that area, and better serve that vulnerable community. And then in Manassas, we're working with Catholics for Housing. They purchased the East End Mobile Home Community to ensure there wasn't displacement due to health and safety issues. And we're excited to be working with this very mission-driven organization to ensure those residents are taken care of and will have good housing as we move forward. We think this is really so important to creating inclusive communities all around our state. We want to make sure there's an array of housing options available to the people that live and work in your communities. So let me stop and pivot back to you, Erik.
Thanks, Susan. So, and I see Steve Sandy had a question that kind of segues nice into this discussion here from Franklin County about some efforts they're working on with a regional housing study for the Roanoke region, and thinking about a housing summit. That is an excellent idea, and give an example. Given Eastern Shore is an area where Virginia Housing and DHCD have been partnering with the planning district, the towns, the two counties on the Eastern Shore, as well as community organizations, community advocates who are advocating for more affordable housing. And so that is a second year. The first year was a in person, everyone there, and this year was an online summit. And we actually had the governor scheduled to come, and ended up he was able to. Wasn't able to come, but he sent his delegation there electronically. So definitely would encourage that. And it's a great way to get there's so many different actors in the housing space. A great way for exchange to even how we can create sidebar conversations and future kind of ideas that can be planted, seeds can be planted there. Susan gave some wonderful examples of what can happen when you combine funding resources in the different examples she provided. That Vibrant Communities Initiative she mentioned is an attempt at combining both Virginia Housing Community Development Block Grant from HUD, a federal funding source, and Housing Trust Fund dollars, and whether it be through a VCI project or just through combining different resources that are available through our agencies and other agencies. Often you'll find USDA rural development resources or Department of Transportation resource, VDOT resources. There's always various resources that take to get done something that's placemaking scale in terms of the affordable housing unit, but also the infrastructure around it and the other amenities. So the one I did want to say a couple more things about was the Southwood model and what is happening in Albemarle and what with really finding a way to change the paradigm on ownership for mobile home parks, and the General Assembly has had a lot of bipartisan interest in providing incentives and tools for levels of ownership to ensure that some of the only non-subsidized affordable housing in the Commonwealth, mobile home parks, that exist in rural Virginia and in urban and suburban Virginia, and to varying levels. But the key is that there is still a possibility and potential with funding sources and some of the new notice requirements that have passed in the General Assembly to really partner with DHCD, to really partner with housing and organizations like Habitat for Humanity or others to really maintain affordability, but also bring new units in. I love what they've done in Albemarle to create, they're actually expanding the amount of units right next to the site, and then working on home ownership opportunities, really community engagement driven, which is why housing is really key at the local level, because it's all about local aid and community engagement to create those win-wins on affordable housing. I do want to emphasize that we really want to be there with you and your membership to maintain affordability, so help communities reimagine what their community can look like as they rehab what are in many cases structures that have not very energy efficient, some cases become unsafe, etc. for the residents. So it's an experience that we kept that expanding area, see and would focus on the couple that mentioned and see how we can work together on combining resources in that space. The example I might give is just that so many of your communities non-shelter, which is basically hotel covering our people experiencing homelessness. And as we all know, during a pandemic, mass sheltering is not the way to shelter, and so the state and your regions have been working together with hotels and motels to have federal funding assisting with hotel motel sheltering during the pandemic. But really, long term, we need more of a supply permanent supportive housing and some really innovative models and ideas for how to create new stock of affordable housing to help a veteran who is now in a hotel pandemic because they lost their job, or they lost their job. Someone with mental health, serious mental illness that into housing stability, if we link them with voucher assistance or the different Medicaid assistance. So we really need assistance to partner on that's a big coming out of the pandemic. We're in a short-term emergency response on hotel motel, but there's communities, rural and urban, that are thinking outside the box to really say, how do we hey, should we buy a hotel motel? Should we come up with some solutions that are going to cost less long term get to better outcomes, which is what it's all about. So those are a couple that I mentioned. The other Susan mentioned, and I really appreciate Virginia Housing's leadership on working to increase the supply of homeownership opportunities for minority populations. There's been underserved populations. We have partnered with Virginia Housing on the Acquire, Renovate, and Sell program, and that program is intended to help rehab properties and then provide home ownership opportunities to new home buyers at 80% or less of your local area median income. So we're working together on some new tools, and that's delivered regionally to really try to get home ownership opportunities, and in the process rehab homes that could then go back on the market or be there for a great home ownership opportunity. And last, I say commissions and your work on the regional planning, like Steve Sandy mentioned, or like the Eastern Shore has done, and there's I could name 20 examples. I think is so critical because as we all know, at the end of the day, our workforce in our regions is mobile, and especially now with the pandemic, understanding what your region needs is in terms of the supply of affordable housing for the future, and what your various options are with increased density or increased opportunities for single family homes as well. That process. That there is something localities leading on to make sure that we have integrated communities with the supply of affordable housing for all income levels, all workforce in our region. So that is something that I commend you all for, and just know that has to happen at expanding rates if we're going to supply enough affordable housing in partnership with the private sector. So we are definitely all in on summits or plans and working with friends and work with some of their REACH resources that they've been using, or if we can community applying planning resources. Several PDC planning district commissions have used that and some of them have added in opportunity zones and other kind of different incentives that may be able to assist. So that's a really exciting development. So Chris, I'll punt it back to you.
Okay, thank you both, and I'd like to turn the conversation a little bit, pulling on some things both of you just mentioned, whether it was around home ownership and underserved communities, and Susan, I think you were talking some about inclusiveness. So we've certainly seen a heightened awareness around what I would call social justice and equity issues of late. And undoubtedly, these conversations and events impact the work of both DHCD and Virginia Housing. So just two questions that are somewhat coupled together, and also build on what you've already started talking about. But can you expand a little bit on what you have in mind when you talk about the concept of inclusive communities, and especially for those communities that have been historically underserved? And also, are there any special direct initiatives or efforts that your organizations are undertaking to address some of the systemic disparities, like you said, whether it's home ownership rates in certain communities, or just access to services and resource in some of our communities?
Yeah. Sure. I'll start, and we are, as I mentioned, that's a hallmark of our new strategic plan, inclusive communities. And certainly in this time of increased attention, well-deserved, on social justice issues, including diversity and inclusion, we really need to look for new models. And for us, inclusive communities talks about communities that provide an array of housing options, promote the mixed income and mixed use development that I talked about earlier, taking steps to help deconcentrate poverty, and understanding the role that housing plays, linking to other sectors, because as I said, I think housing's just at the core, but housing links to health, to economic competitiveness, to education, really to all sectors. And for inclusive communities, we need to really bring these into a holistic view. because we know how important that is to families living within our community. So we are really working hard to address systemic disparities. And of course, these have been present for decades, if not centuries, but we've really got to roll up our sleeves and look at how we can all work on new programs and policies. One of the things I mentioned that we had created was a Minority Business Advisory Council, members of the minority community, both business, programmatically, to look at how we can do better to serve historically underserved communities. We've also partnered with some new organizations like the National Association of Minority Mortgage Bankers of America and the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, both minority organizations, to really gain a better perspective and to learn from their insights and expertise, so that we can work together along with the Virginia chapters of those organizations to really bring a more focus on what's going to work, even things like continued education, counseling, new products. We're open to all of these ideas. And there are a number of programmatic efforts that we've actually started to put into place. In addition, we're dedicating some of our REACH resources, $1 million at this point, for targeted housing education and counseling, to create some new resources to address minority home ownership and to try to close some of that gap that currently exists. Because I know most of you have seen the data, and you know that home ownership rates declined nationally after the 2008 financial crisis, but no single group experienced a greater decline than the African American population, whose rate fell almost 6% between 2006 and 2016. So this means that the African American community is not only still recovering from damage done by those economic conditions, but also by decades preceding the crisis and not having generational wealth building. So we are really wanting to look at how we can close some of those gaps, because we know, again, with COVID right now, that things are worsening. The most vulnerable populations are becoming more vulnerable. And how can we address that? We know that Virginia is doing a little bit better than the national average, but better is not enough. We need to really do more and to really figure out how we can better serve people of color and these other underrepresented constituencies. Our goal is to really create and strengthen our economy by building equity, promoting greater housing stability, and attracting more investment. There is the study that Erik mentioned that we will be participating in, and I know a lot of you will want to be aware of how that's going over the next year with House Bill 854, which is a broad look at affordable housing and what our needs are. And we've added to what the legislature passed, really focusing more on social inequities and the impact of COVID on our environment. So a lot going on. I tell you, honestly, right now, we probably all have more questions than we have answers. But I think awareness is key. And now, again, we need to work together to collaborate to find out some of your ideas, what you see as those needs in your communities. Erik?
Thanks, Susan. So I'll mention a couple of things in this ask. For we also will be supporting Virginia Housing with the efforts on minority homeownership with the Acquire, Renovate, Sell program that I mentioned. We also have a payment assistance program, as Susan mentioned, that is critical to our work together on reducing the disparity in home ownership rates. Another program and effort I'll mention is something called the Virginia Individual Development Accounts, VITA. And so Virginia Housing is a partner in helping us with funding for that initiative, as well as your region can apply for community development block grant resources. Virginia Housing resources are focused on home ownership savings and basically partnering with potential homeowners on saving for their down payment we also have a component with CDBG for small business and education savings. So in terms of wealth generation opportunities, that that is a critical component to the efforts on creating inclusive rural communities, more equitable and inclusive. The main focus I'll mention is really Governor Northam has asked our agency to lean in on the work to prevent evictions, and really, if you look at the data, regardless of income levels, regardless of evictions are higher for minority populations, American, minority Virginians, and really some of the data on that from the VCU Evictions Lab shows that a lot of that can be traced back to redlining and other policies of the past that are still having impacts in terms of outcomes of today. And so we as an agency are really focused on preventing and diverting evictions. And I want to thank Virginia Housing too, as they are working with us in partnership with the governor on the rent and mortgage relief program. So I do want to, that is really a focus in the pandemic on evictions prevention, and really this other case through housing or through a tenant-based application process through 30 local grantees that are serving every locality process. Locality is designed to landlords and tenants whole because of COVID income losses when those have not prevented a household from being able to pay their full rent or mortgage. So evictions prevention and foreclosure prevention, I mentioned too, for homeowners is a critical aspect. Important long-term though is creating a system, and there is money in the budget, about $3 million in the state budget, that would help program with applications for localities and their partners to apply systems that would help make evictions rare. And so in essence, this would help create local data collection, local partnerships between landlords, our social service agencies, the courts, tenant groups, to really the continuum of assistance to make housing stability a focus. Really, most of the homelessness assistance that exists from the federal government and state government is focused on households closest to homelessness. And we know that the outcome for households when we prevent an eviction help with those one-time needs that happen when a car breaks down or someone doesn't have medical coverage and has a big medical bill. Those kind of one-time housing stability payments are what that prevention pilot is designed to create a system of. Different localities across the Commonwealth have implemented that already. Pre-pandemic, they're much lower to really, and it is costing and localities their families. The majority of the people assisted by the rent and mortgage relief program are children. And so for our educational outcomes, for the housing stability for the children of the Commonwealth, the prevention is critical, and it is impacting disproportionately, unfortunately, Black and Brown communities. So we are focused on working with that Commonwealth-wide, and we're really think it's a critical issue moving forward to keep partnering on. So the last piece I'll mention is just the Housing Trust Fund as well. The governor's investment in that is really focused on the long term. I mean, we're really been focused. There's so much new federal and state resources for the pandemic emergency housing response, but long term, more permanent supportive housing, more affordable housing that is affordable at the various income levels for your locality based on your cost of living is at the end of the day what's critical to making sure there are both home ownership and rental opportunities for all Virginians living in your community. So that's some of the work we're focusing on, and I'm excited to partner with housing and your membership on the long-term look at the pandemic and issues of equity and housing.
So both Erik and Susan, you touched on a lot that speak to priorities that are coming out in terms of the governor and the General Assembly in terms of where they are focusing on the future. Rent and mortgage relief, evictions, diversion, housing trust fund. Erik, you've talked quite a bit about House Bill 854. So before leaving the topic around what's coming out of Richmond and our elected officials, is there anything else that you're seeing that we should be aware of, we should be tracking? For example, I know there was another House bill that was referenced earlier we didn't really touch on. So anything else either one of you would want to provide to our audience?
But just to mention that Erik touched on it, but House Bill 810 I think was very important because it was a Delegate Bourne, Jeff Bourne, introduced that bill, and it kicked off a study that we all worked on primarily over the summer. And it was to look at whether or not the state of Virginia could create a parallel program to the federal low-income housing tax credit. And that study, we can give that link to Joe and Carrie, but I think it was very important because it, showed that we could, the low-income housing tax credit has been a great driver for rental housing. And a lot of what we see in our communities wouldn't have been possible without that federal program. So if we can mirror it with some state, similar state tax credit, I think it would be very helpful. But what I also thought was interesting is out of that study came the idea of maybe we need a home ownership tax credit also. I know the idea has been floated at the federal level, but the idea was to try to look at perhaps down the road a home ownership tax credit program that could help us maybe address some of those disparities that we're seeing with the gap in minority home ownership. So that study is out there also, and we really want to include looking at that concept as we move forward with the bigger study that we've mentioned, House Bill 854, to see how all of these resources could kind of come together and what might be the most efficient and effective way to use Virginia's resources in the future. Erik, did you have anything?
Erik, did you have anything to add, or have you covered a lot of this already?
I think the only thing I didn't mention is just that there's going to be so much going on at the federal level, conversation about the next relief package and rent and mortgage assistance. And so we're definitely, the governor is pushing for how to be one major component of that. And we're definitely, I would say, looking to continue to partner with localities and nonprofit partners and landlords moving into the next new year on rent and mortgage assistance coming out of the pandemic. And so that's a lot going on about what obviously more assistance for localities and states that's more flexible with our so we're this one area where it's so critical for us all to keep a pulse on that. Appreciate Vaco's work on that.
Yeah, it's been an exciting time. I can't remember where housing has received so much attention, both at the state and federal level. So it's great to start getting that recognition and understanding of how fundamentally important this topic is.
Yes.
So I know we're getting close to time, so I'm going to try to wrap us up with one final question and around a topic that usually gets a lot of people excited, and that's around innovation. So, we've talked about how much housing touches on our communities, and it really is more than just bricks and sticks or brick and mortar. It really touches everything around our physical well-being, our lives, our economic development, and commerce. So can you each talk a little bit about the role of DHCD and the role of Virginia Housing in helping to spur innovation in terms of looking for increased affordable housing solutions?
Well, I was really hoping that we would have time for this topic because it's really exciting. And, you know, when we talk about innovation, it's we've been really trying to highlight the need for innovation. In fact, our Board of Commissioners did dedicate some low-income housing tax credits to driving for innovation in building in our rental programs. We have also really been trying to look at what new types of housing might be available to address some of the inventory shortages that we have. One of the most exciting things I feel is we went all the way across country and found this company called IndieDwell that was doing a great job, and they're a mission focused organization, but they were really doing a great job in creating homes made of shipping containers. And as you all know, in Virginia, we have a lot of shipping containers. So these shipping container homes, we were impressed because high quality, energy efficiency, durability, ease of maintenance, and affordability. And so we actually brought some over and showcased them at Housing Forward Virginia's Housing X Conference. They were on HUD's Innovation Conference on the National Mall, and they were at the 2019 Virginia Governor's Housing Conference. To really let people see exactly what the possibilities are. And we donated one of those homes to one of our partners, Project Home in Richmond, and they got a lot in a community in Richmond and ultimately sold it to a 58-year-old woman who was a first-time home buyer, a minority. And we didn't say she had to do it, but she purchased it through a Virginia housing loan, which made it all that much better. Now we are working to hopefully have IndieDwell come to Virginia and have a plant in Virginia so that we can really access this type of housing directly. We've also been working with a company called Next Step in Danville, exciting new housing technology to increase their starter home inventory. And Danville, we partnered there with the city and the Redevelopment Housing Authority, and of course, Next Step, a national nonprofit, to have the next generation of manufactured homes, beautiful, high quality, faster to produce, and affordable. So we think this is another great opportunity. And we're trying to, again, create innovative approaches. We just dedicated some of our REACH resources to spur innovation, and we have awarded funding to a modular construction project that'll be in Martinsville and will include 15 new detached cottages and 12 townhomes. We're also partnering with a nonprofit in Chesterfield County for manufactured housing to replace some of the housing in mobile home park communities. And one thing I'm really excited about is we just have worked with Virginia Tech on a grant to support 3D printed homes. Now that sounds, you know, a little bit wild, but you know, the way we have see innovation, I think it might just be around the corner. So we have got to work on these new models for inventory. But in addition to that, I think as we come out of COVID, we're going to need to have innovation in the way we do our financing programs, the way we view affordable housing. You know, for example, a lot of you now, because of COVID, might have opportunities to draw people away from urban areas to live in a place where they might better be able to afford housing, maybe be closer to family, and be able to work remotely. So we need to take the opportunity to look, you know, Erik and his great team at DHCD are really helping with broadband efforts, which I think are going to be important to this. But how can we make sure that your communities are able to support that greater demand for the ability to provide remote work? And I'm real excited about the possibilities that we have, and certainly look forward to continued conversations with you all. Erik,
Great
did you
answer,
want to
Susan.
add
Thank you,
anything?
Susan.
Yes, I'll add that things that this space is exciting in terms of building technology is about or even really there's so much opportunity in that space. The last housing study focused on that as one of the 4 key potentials for increasing the supply of affordable housing. Susan gave some great examples of what she and her team have been doing with manufactured and modular housing and new quality of production and just the of it's one of the it's one of the industries that in terms of the of factory, building things in a factory, automating and creating systems but it's very possible. And we've had some real worker shortages for building quality family industries in the Commonwealth and in the nation. Really building technology, both manufacture, panelized construction, seeing opportunities the cost and efficiencies through we have the national model codes or developed nationally and then internationally and then updated every 3 years in Virginia. We're about to get a phase of adoption and have a October 19th meeting for the board here meeting the consensus and non-consensus recommendation from stakeholders. There's some really innovative ideas. There's some about new consensus proposals on increasing building technology. There's things like tiny homes and ways that you can create tiny homes and be code compliant. We are very fortunate, as Susan mentioned, that we have universities in Virginia that are like Virginia Tech and others who are at the forefront of how like Virginia research. The other thing I'd mention is that there are ideas such as accessory dwelling units and increasing within the footprint of current housing, how we create additional housing opportunities. I know many localities are looking at that, and there's some debate on different ways to promote that in the building code process. Is another big focus and really looks at the long-term affordability for community. And there's several efforts. Every code update this code cycle had to look at resiliency, and there's some great consensus ideas coming from stakeholders in localities on how to increase resiliency while still looking at affordability. And then energy efficiency is the other big space with energy costs and the focus on energy efficiency in the Commonwealth. There's some really exciting new opportunities. I want to plant one seed in your mind is that the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative bill that passed the General Assembly, it included 50% of the revenue from that bill to be focused on whether is it low-income energy efficiency improvements to benefit low-income Virginians. So DHCD will be a program and going later in December to get some input on building out that program. Upwards of 50 million in resources available. Really look at new construction and rehab and other ideas that come from stakeholders about how we could use these new funds at the state level to incentivize and create best practices to look at the long-term cost of energy, for our homeowners and tenants and developers. So there's a lot of space, and I'm really glad this space. And you ended on some because the bottom line is that the answer on what are going to be the next answer on what things are changing so rapidly that it may come from some community, it may come from other stakeholders to create the next idea to really change paradigm for what we can do in affordable housing and technology is, I mean, you all know land use is so critical and so important, but building technology is one of those areas where we get it, win-wins where everyone can often agree. So I'm very hopeful about the future of housing because of the building technology components and the other, like you mentioned, financing, land use, all the other key components are going to be look into the future. To you.
Well, with that, I think we have really unpacked a lot of conversation in the last hour and a half. I want to thank Vaco again for the opportunity and for hosting us. I did want to follow up to something Joe had mentioned earlier, that as part of the conference, there will be the opportunity for us to have a landing page where we can present some links and some information that we've discussed today. So we will be working with Vaco to make sure we get some case studies and some additional information that Joe's been posting in the chat room to make that available for everyone. And then I really just want to thank Erik and Susan for taking this time. Again, you probably need a little sip of water now. There was a lot of talking over the last 90 minutes, but really appreciate it. I hope everyone got a lot out of this conversation.
Hey, Chris, this is Joe Lurch.
Thank you.
If we'll see if maybe there's a potential for questions, we can unmute people, or if people want to mute, maybe for just one or two questions. But one thing I wanted to, I was glad Erik mentioned the RGGI, the funds that are going to be available for energy efficiency. The other half of those funds, or about 45% of them, are also going to be for recurrent flooding. And so there may be an opportunity, a synergistic opportunity, where you get older housing developments that were built prior to stormwater development standards. So you could combine maybe, flooding improvements or stormwater improvements with energy efficiency. So that might be another opportunity. I do have one question in talking about innovation and land use. Delegate Sally Hudson in the past General Assembly, she had a bill that was sent to the Housing Commission, and I work on a work group there, and we looked at it, and it would allow localities a lot of flexibility in establishing what's known as inclusionary housing. And as a part of that bill, it would really provide a lot more flexibility for a locality in terms of their codes and their land use, but would also let them determine what they consider to be affordable housing in their community. Because as you know, affordable housing in Halifax is going to be really different from affordable housing in Arlington. And I just didn't know whether Susan and Erik, if that was something that you see that could be useful for the General Assembly to grant localities that authority to be a little more flexible in addressing the need.
Well, do you want to take it, Erik, or do you want me?
Happy to go first.
Okay.
I'll start. So on thanks, Joe, for the great idea about you're right, the Department of DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation, is the lead on implementing the resiliency part of the RGGI funds. So love to talk further and hear your all's ideas about how as folks are working on resiliency, they can also do the energy efficiency improvements. The key, and both of them have a focus on serving low-income residents, low and moderate income residents. So love to think that through and get your members' ideas on that as we go forward. The concept was to really help rehab and new construction, where we get the best incentives possible to get above code energy efficiency improvements. And so, yeah, that definitely efficiency to coordinate with DCR about hearing ways that can be helped at the local level to coordinate that. On the, I can't really comment on where the administration's position will be on a specific bill. We work on those throughout the General Assembly process, but I'll just say that I know we're looking for all types of solutions to be part of any conversation where there's an idea that would give tools to increase the supply of affordable housing So would love to be involved with more conversations on that, and definitely aware of the Housing Commission's work there. Really, when we focus on programs at the state level, we're looking at the area median income, the area median, the affordability levels at the locality level, and then even HUD has some ability to look even at look at zip code level. So there's a lot of that data out there in terms of the programs that localities would apply to at DHCD that factor in the risk factor local median income. And then also, really, as I think Susan or Chris may have mentioned, it's really to mention that the percentage of income that households are having to spend for their housing and wanting to keep that below 30%, 30% to be an affordable unit for them. So definitely would be interested in more conversations or ideas that VACO had. And Joe, you've been feeding great to me about and Virginia Housing about different things in the General Assembly. So we're happy to take any ideas or recommendations you have to give ladies tools to work the private sector, nonprofits, increase the supply of affordable housing. I'll turn it to Susan in case she has additional thoughts on that, in case she has.
Yeah, I think, the one thing is, as you touched on, Erik, is it's really hard to define affordable housing generically, that one definition meets all programs, all communities. It's really hard to do that because, we have various programs, some like the low-income housing tax credit program federally, it's a 60% below. We have others, housing choice voucher, around 30% below. We have our mixed income, which even can go above 100%. Our home ownership, we target 80%. So affordable housing, really, I think the definition depends on the program and the goals of that particular program that you're trying to achieve, as well as, again, as I think you alluded to, Joe, what the community's goals are for their resources.
Thank you so much to the both of you. If it's all right, I know we're encouraging upon your time. I'm going to open it up to anybody if they want to unmute, and we probably have time for one question. I know everybody's been patient, and I know Steve, Sandy, thanks to you for putting your questions in the chat. So is there anybody that would like to ask a question of the panelists? All right, going once, twice, 3 times. Thank you both again, and thank you, Chris, for being our moderator. As Chris said, we're gonna a lot of things that I put into the chat, we're gonna put on a landing page. I want to once again thank you to Virginia Housing for sponsoring this, and we look forward to having this available to all the attendees, registered attendees for our conference.
Thank you, Joe, Carrie.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Thank you
so much.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.